So we're on a plane to go visit Pope John Paul II in St. Louis. And one of my favorite things to do with Mrs. Parks is to hold her hand. She had the most exquisite hands. They were expressive, they were long. She thought the ugliest feature of her hands were her hands, so she always wore gloves to hide them. And I kept on telling her how beautiful they were. And so on this flight to meet the Pope, she did not have her gloves on. So we're holding hands, I was feeling her, we were halfway there, and I finally said to Mrs. Parks, to break the silence, Mrs. Parks, of all the people in the world, why did you invite me to go with you on white? And Mrs. Parks didn't drop my hand, she kept it, she looked down. She never answered any question that anyone asked her without measuring her response. And then she looked at me and smiled and went, oh dear, I didn't know you were white. So about 15 minutes later, she hasn't dropped my hand. She says to me, I need your help. You are a great writer, and I want to say something to the Pope, but I want it to be short. I want to talk about racism in America, which is a form of cancer, but I need to make it short because, as you know, I can't write too long because I have arthritis, severe arthritis. So I didn't pick up my baby laptop computer right away because all of a sudden I said, I can't believe this. I was just happy to be with you, to meet the Pope. I have crosses in my pocket to have him blessed, and then I can give them to my friends. And then she would make fun of me when I said that. She didn't judge me when I said that. She said, you have to understand, God brought us here for a message about mission and vision. We need to seize this moment. And I immediately pulled out my little laptop and I wrote something in probably 2 minutes, and then I read it to Mrs. Parks. And she said, that's perfect. Still holding my hand again. But there's one word in here I want you to change. I don't think the Pope is a great man. And I went, Mrs. Parks, it's the Pope. I'm Catholic. How is he not a great man? And she, again, in her measured way, said, everybody is great. I don't care if they're a small child. I don't care what their economic background is. I don't care that they are of any religion or of any color. Everybody is great. And so I said to her, Mrs. Parks, what would you say? She thought for a moment and said, moral leader. How right she was. So I'm going to fast forward because I only have a few more minutes. And we're waiting for the Pope in this grand hall. It's very ornate. And the handlers came up and said, Mrs. Parks, please, the only thing we ask of you is please don't get out of your wheelchair. The Pope will come to you. And so we just sat there, and all of a sudden these big, ornate, heavy doors opened, and in walked, not the Pope, but every bishop and every cardinal that was in St. Louis with the Pope. And they came single file to greet Mrs. Parks. And one of the first bishop was about where you are right there, and he got on the floor and he crawled up to Mrs. Parks. Oh my God. And he kissed her foot. That action, that gesture meant more to me than anyone could possibly say. It's what speaks legends. It's what Mrs. Parks did by refusing to get up from her seat on the bus. And I lost it. I couldn't control my tears. And then she had him sit up and they spoke privately. And then it seemed like 100 archbishops and cardinals went by. But time stopped when he kissed her foot. And then everyone was gone. The, whatever you call it, the hall was empty. The doors had closed, and then they opened again, and in came the Pope. And he had on one of those white, tall, what do they call them? Mitre. Okay, and then he had a heavy, beautiful gilt and white robe, and then he had the And he was having a hard time, thank you for your empathy. He was having a hard time walking, he was so weighted down by everything. And Mrs. Parks saw this, and she said to me, Lady H, help me up. And you never say anything to or disagree with her ever. She always did the right thing, so I helped her up, and in the process, all the crosses in my pocket fell on the ground. It was marble, and you could hear the clink, 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 clink. It was humiliating. I had a red face. I left them there as though it never happened. And what was interesting after is the handlers did give them back to me and said the Pope had blessed them. But Mrs. Parks walks to him, and when he saw her getting out of the wheelchair, he stopped. He was so appreciative that she had been so empathetic to come to him. He said, how did you know I was in so much pain? I wasn't sure if I would make it to you. And she opened up a book that she wrote. If ever you get a chance to pick up her book, Quiet Strength, it's unbelievably simple and perfect. And she opened the book and she read what she had written, which was to ask him to please speak with her on racism the next morning. So the two of them spoke the next morning together about racism in America. And he didn't just speak about that with her that day. If you go and Google his speeches around the world, he spoke about racism everywhere. So she had such a deep effect on him. And one of the people years later told me that the Pope had left her book on his nightstand with her note in it. It was so important to him. So the lessons I learned from Mrs. Parks was seize the moment. And the second thing is let go of your ego, because ego means edging God out. Thank you.